People think family monsters reveal themselves through screaming matches or violence. Not mine. In my family, cruelty was wrapped in expensive silk, golf course photos, and pious smiles. I never imagined I would weaponize my cybersecurity skills against my own flesh and blood until an anonymous email pinged my server at 2 in the morning. Hold your judgment. Just listen to how a single-souled cello brought down an entire empire of lies. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Zoe. I am a 31-year-old data analytics engineer, a profession that demands absolute logic, cold hard facts, and a complete detachment from emotion. My entire life runs on complex algorithms, predictable patterns, and secure networks. I make sense of the digital chaos for a living. But there is absolutely no algorithm in the world designed to prepare you for the sudden, sickening collapse of everything you thought you knew about your own flesh and blood. It was exactly 2 in the morning when an automated alert pinged on my private, encrypted server. I was still awake, compiling a security report, when the notification flashed across my screen. The sender's Internet Protocol address routed back to a poorly secured public terminal at the Oak Haven Municipal Library. The subject line of the email was completely blank. The message was from my 8-year-old niece, Chloe. I stared at the glowing blue screen of my monitor, the ambient hum of my cooling fans fading into dead silence as my blood ran ice cold. Aunt Zoe, Grandma sold my cello. They said I do not need art school anymore. I am at the library waiting for the security guard to close up because no one is home. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. Let me be perfectly clear about the situation. Chloe was not a child who was physically battered, nor was she locked in a dark closet without meals. My parents, Arthur and Beatrice, were far too obsessed with their pristine upper-crust social optics to ever engage in such crude, visible cruelty. Instead, they employed a much more insidious form of neglect. They made sure Chloe carried a platinum credit card heavily loaded with funds so she could purchase overpriced organic sandwiches at the local upscale bistros. Physically, her basic survival needs were met. Emotionally and developmentally, however, she was being systematically starved to death. They stripped away her passions, pulled her out of her private education, and completely erased her sense of belonging. They left an innocent 8-year-old girl to aimlessly wander the safe, affluent public spaces and community centers of their wealthy suburban town, all just so they could enjoy their uninterrupted, luxurious leisure time without the burden of parenting. I did not bother typing out a reply. I grabbed my keys, threw a heavy trench coat over my sleepwear, and drove through the dead of night straight toward Oak Haven. The journey took just under 2 hours, but gripping the steering wheel in the dark, it felt like an agonizing eternity. When I finally pulled my car up to my parents' sprawling, meticulously manicured estate, the exterior was as deceptively pristine as ever, bathed in the soft, inviting glow of expensive landscape lighting. I bypassed the ornate brass doorbell, marched to the side entrance, and punched my old security code into the keypad. The heavy door clicked open with a quiet mechanical hum. Stepping inside the foyer, the air felt incredibly sterile, heavily scented with expensive vanilla diffusers that failed to mask the sheer emptiness of the space. But what truly struck me was not the familiar architectural layout of my childhood home. It was the sickening, overwhelming volume of brand-new, obscene luxury that had seemingly sprouted overnight. The formal dining room, a place where we once shared quiet family dinners, had been completely gutted to make way for a custom, climate-controlled wine cellar stocked with hundreds of premium vintage bottles. Leaning casually against the imported white marble island in the center of the kitchen was a pristine, limited-edition set of titanium golf clubs. The entire house reeked of sudden, unaccountable, and highly suspicious wealth. I found Chloe deeply recessed in the main living room. She was curled up into a tiny, fragile ball on the massive, imported leather sofa, the massive television screen casting a cold, flickering blue light across her pale face. She was physically unharmed, dressed in a designer cashmere sweater, but her eyes were completely hollow. They lacked the bright, inquisitive, and joyful spark that used to light up the entire room whenever she practiced her music. Sitting there in the dark, she looked exactly like a ghost haunting a high-end luxury furniture showroom. I sat down slowly next to her and gently stroked her shoulder. She looked up at me, her voice entirely flat and terrifyingly devoid of a child's emotion. "They left yesterday morning," she whispered softly. "They bought a massive motorhome, a luxury recreational vehicle. They told me they were going on a cross-country tour for 3 weeks. I felt a heavy, sickening knot tighten deep in my stomach. "Who is watching you, sweetie?" I asked, forcing my tone to remain as level and comforting as possible. Chloe pointed a small, trembling finger toward the upper corner of the ceiling, where a sleek black security camera blinked with a tiny, relentless red light. "The online babysitter," she replied mechanically. "Grandma said a lady from an agency checks the cameras every 4 hours to make sure I am inside the house. If I need anything, I am supposed to press the intercom button." A blinding, white-hot rage surged aggressively behind my eyes. An online babysitter. My parents had quite literally abandoned an 8-year-old child in a massive, empty mansion to be monitored like a piece of warehouse inventory while they paraded around the country in a luxury vehicle. Every human instinct within me screamed to dial emergency services immediately, to let the local police drag Arthur and Beatrice out of their shiny new toy and heavy metal handcuffs. But my analytical, data-driven mind quickly overrode my furious heart. I knew my parents intimately. They were highly respected pillars of the Oak Haven community. They possessed money, social influence, and a carefully curated, bulletproof facade of being respectable, loving, and generous grandparents. If I called the authorities right now, they would spin the narrative effortlessly. They would hire the best lawyers to claim I was merely an unstable, estranged daughter overreacting to a modern, high-tech home security setup. They would paint themselves as the victims. They would win the public relations battle, and Chloe would ultimately pay the terrible price. I needed irrefutable, undeniable proof. I needed cold, hard data. "Come on, Chloe," I said softly, standing up and quickly packing her a small suitcase with essentials. "We are going to a nice hotel." I did not scream into the void. I did not smash their expensive vintage wine bottles against the pristine marble floors. I simply took my young niece by the hand and walked straight out of that cold, empty museum of a house. Once we were safely settled in a secure, comfortable suite downtown, and Chloe was finally breathing softly, asleep in a real warm bed, I did not try to rest. I brewed a massively strong pot of black coffee, sat at the desk, opened my heavily encrypted laptop, and cracked my knuckles. Arthur and Beatrice genuinely thought they could hide their profound cruelty behind thick oak doors and high-tech cameras. But they completely forgot what their daughter did for a living. It was time to hunt. The hotel room was completely silent, save for the rhythmic, steady breathing of my niece from the adjacent bedroom. I sat cross-legged on the small desk chair, my fingers resting lightly on the illuminated keys of my workstation. At Aegis Cyber Defense, my daily operational mandate was hunting down corporate espionage and state-sponsored data breaches. Dismantling the digital lives of 2 suburban retirees was going to be an absolute walk in the park. But this was not business. This was surgical. I started with the most glaring discrepancy: the school. Oak Haven Academy had an elite, heavily guarded network, but their parent portal was notoriously porous. Using a standard packet sniffer and a slightly modified backdoor script I had written years ago for a vulnerability test, I bypassed their rudimentary firewall in under 14 minutes. I navigated straight to Chloe's student profile. My screen flashed with a bold red status marker indicating her enrollment had been terminated exactly 6 months ago. I pulled the archived correspondence logs between the Academy's administration and the listed guardians. There it was, an official withdrawal notice, citing a desire for a different educational path, complete with the digitized legal signature of my older brother Marcus. Marcus was currently stationed on a highly remote offshore drilling rig in the North Sea off the coast of Norway. He worked brutal, grueling shifts, relying on a patchy satellite uplink for communication. I extracted the raw source code of the withdrawal email to examine the routing headers. A digital footprint never lies. It strips away all the polite smiles and country club manners, leaving only the naked truth. I ran the sending Internet Protocol address through my proprietary geolocation database. The geographical ping did not bounce from a Scandinavian satellite server. It resolved directly to a local broadband service provider right here in our hometown. I dug one layer deeper, isolating the unique media access control address of the transmitting router. It was a perfect, indisputable match to the high-speed wireless mesh network installed in my parents' living room. Arthur and Beatrice had forged their own son's signature to pull his daughter out of school. But why? The answer to human deception almost always lies in the ledger. Marcus was pulling in a massive hazard pay salary on the rig. I knew for a fact he automatically wired $15,000 a month into a dedicated family trust account. It was explicitly earmarked for Chloe's premium tuition, private music lessons, and future college fund. I deployed a specialized financial tracking algorithm, one we typically use to trace shell company laundering, and pointed it at the trust's routing numbers. The financial architecture of my parents' greed blossomed across my dual monitors in a sickening, highly organized web of illicit transfers. For the past 6 months, the $15,000 a month had not gone anywhere near an educational institution. Instead, it was being systematically siphoned through a secondary, joint checking account. I watched the digital breadcrumbs form a perfect, damning line. $7,000 routed to a luxury automotive group as a down payment for the very recreational vehicle Chloe had mentioned. $4,000 funneled directly into a platinum credit card that showed recent exorbitant charges for first-class airfare to Tuscany and exclusive wine tasting tours. They were literally financing their lavish retirement fantasies using the money meant to secure their granddaughter's future. Yet one massive discrepancy remained unresolved. There was a sudden, glaring influx of capital into Arthur's personal brokerage account precisely 3 weeks ago. A single wire transfer for exactly $20,000. I cross-referenced the date of the transfer with their recent digital activity. I scraped the cache of their shared home computer network, looking for outgoing traffic to high-value marketplaces. My blood ran completely cold when I hit the match. It was a specialized, discreet online auction house dealing in rare antiquities and fine instruments. I breached the site's public transaction ledger and matched the sale date. There, listed under a recently closed private auction, was a late 19th century European cello. Chloe's cello, the one her mother had left her before she passed away. The instrument that had been Chloe's sole source of comfort and emotional expression. My hands hovered over the keyboard, shaking for the first time that night. I traced the outgoing $20,000. It did not go to a savings account. It went straight into Arthur's aggressive portfolio to cover a massive, devastating margin call. My father had gambled heavily on high-risk tech stocks, lost catastrophically, and quietly liquidated an 8-year-old orphan's priceless, sentimental heirloom to cover his own pathetic financial incompetence. Any normal person would have driven back to that house and burned it to the ground. I did not. Rage is messy. Rage makes mistakes. Data is patient. I methodically captured every single packet of data. I took high-resolution screenshots of the forged Internet Protocol logs, exported the banking transaction histories, and downloaded the auction house receipts. I compiled the massive trove of evidence into a secure, air-gapped external drive, wrapping the entire directory in military-grade encryption. I locked the drive inside a small fireproof travel safe. I possessed enough digital ammunition to completely obliterate their lives, to strip away their country club memberships, their false respectability, and their freedom. But I was not going to strike yet. I needed them to feel completely safe, perfectly comfortable in their stolen luxury. I would wait until they were standing in the brightest spotlight possible before I cut the power. I waited exactly 21 days. For 3 entire weeks, I kept my young niece completely shielded in our luxury hotel suite, working my cybersecurity job remotely while she safely watched educational programs and ordered room service. I did not send a single text message to my parents. I did not call them. I simply monitored the global positioning system tracker I had discreetly linked to the digital dashboard of their newly registered recreational vehicle. The very second the blinking digital icon crossed the county line, I knew exactly where their first stop would be. They did not rush home to embrace the vulnerable granddaughter they had abandoned. They drove directly to the Oak Creek Country Club for the exclusive Sunday brunch service. The club lobby was a towering monument to suburban pretense. It was a sprawling architectural marvel crafted from imported mahogany and polished marble, reeking heavily of expensive perfumes and deep-seated insecurities. As I walked through the massive, heavy glass doors, the ambient noise was a sickening symphony of clinking crystal champagne flutes and hollow performative laughter. I spotted them instantly. Arthur and Beatrice were holding court near the grand stone fireplace, completely surrounded by the local elite. They were aggressively flashing their fresh tans, sipping mimosas, and passing around a digital tablet showing off high-resolution photographs of their extravagant cross-country adventure. I adjusted the strap of my leather handbag and approached them with the slow, measured grace of an apex predator circling a watering hole. "Mother, father, welcome back," I said, my voice cutting through the meaningless chatter with absolute polite precision. Beatrice stiffened immediately. The color rapidly drained from her heavily powdered cheeks for a fraction of a second before her deeply ingrained social conditioning violently kicked in. She quickly plastered on a radiant, entirely fabricated smile and leaned forward to offer a stiff, obligatory embrace. Arthur patted my shoulder with feigned paternal warmth, though his eyes darted nervously toward his wealthy peers. "Darling, what a pleasant surprise," Beatrice lied smoothly, her voice pitched just loud enough for the neighboring socialites to hear clearly. "We were just telling the Harringtons about the stunning sunsets out west." I offered a warm, compliant smile to the gathered crowd, before turning my gaze directly back to my mother. I kept my posture entirely relaxed and my tone perfectly, dangerously conversational. "I am so glad you had a relaxing trip," I replied smoothly. "I actually just had a very quick question regarding the household arrangements. I was looking over the recent schedules, and I was just wondering why Chloe was suddenly transferred to the overcrowded public school district down the road. And oddly enough, I could not seem to find her antique cello anywhere in the house." The surrounding conversation abruptly died. A heavy, highly uncomfortable silence descended upon the small circle of affluent friends. Beatrice did not miss a single beat. She immediately activated her favorite, well-worn persona, the burdened but exceptionally noble matriarch making difficult choices for the greater good. She placed a highly manicured hand dramatically over her pearl necklace and let out a long, theatrical sigh. "Oh, you know how it is in today's world," Beatrice announced, deliberately ensuring her voice carried across the marble foyer. "Chloe needs to learn how to live simply. She has been enjoying far too many privileges for a child her age. Elite private academies and wildly expensive musical instruments were spoiling her rotten. We are simply teaching her the true value of a hard-earned dollar. It is about building strong character, humility, and resilience, really." The surrounding friends murmured in collective, ignorant agreement, nodding their heads in profound respect at my mother's supposed parenting wisdom. It was an absolute masterclass in psychological manipulation, flawlessly painting her blatant financial theft as a strict but deeply loving educational strategy. Arthur, however, sensed the underlying, invisible danger. He stepped significantly closer to me, effectively blocking my line of sight to the others. He maintained a relaxed, jovial posture for the audience, but his voice dropped to a harsh, venomous whisper meant only for my ears. "Your brother Marcus gave us absolute, legally binding guardianship over that girl," he murmured, his breath hot and reeking of expensive scotch. "If you try to overstep your boundaries and interfere with our family decisions, I will not hesitate for a single second. I will file a permanent restraining order against you by tomorrow morning. You have always been prone to deeply paranoid, delusional episodes, haven't you? It would be a terrible shame for a county judge to hear all about your severe mental instability and legally bar you from ever seeing your niece again." It was the ultimate classic threat of a cornered narcissist. Gaslight the victim, aggressively question their sanity, and weaponize the legal system against them. Years ago, that exact kind of psychological intimidation would have crushed my spirit. Today, it was exactly what I needed him to say. I looked him dead in the eyes. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or shed a single tear of frustration. I simply smiled. It was a bright, wide, and terrifyingly agreeable smile. "You are absolutely right, Father," I said cheerfully, taking a deliberate step back to disengage. "My sincere apologies for interrupting your lovely afternoon. Please, enjoy the rest of your brunch." I turned on my heel and walked casually toward the exit, the sharp, rhythmic click of my shoes echoing confidently against the stone floor. I did not look back. I did not need to. Safely tucked inside the inner lining of my handbag, a military-grade micro-digital audio recorder blinked with a steady, quiet green light. The highly sensitive device had flawlessly captured every single frequency of their brittle laughter, every hypocritical admission of neglect disguised as discipline, and every single extortionate threat, entirely in crisp, high-definition audio. The trap was now fully armed, and they had just locked themselves inside it. For as long as I could remember, Arthur and Beatrice had spun a masterful, deeply tragic narrative regarding my older brother. They painted Marcus to our entire social community as the quintessential deadbeat father, a reckless man who cowardly fled his parental responsibilities for a high-paying, dangerous job on the open ocean. They would stand at glittering charity galas, clinking their expensive champagne glasses, and lament loudly to anyone who would listen about how their son simply threw dirty money at his problems from thousands of miles away. They claimed he refused to even make a simple phone call on Chloe's birthday to wish her well. They acted as if they were the holy, self-sacrificing saviors of an abandoned, unloved child. Chloe absolutely believed them. She internalized the agonizing thought that her father simply did not care enough to reach out. I had believed them too, blinded for years by their flawless, calculated theatrical performances. But data, as I had already proven time and time again tonight, does not care about theatrical narratives or fake tears. I needed to establish contact with him immediately. Marcus was stationed on an isolated deep-water oil extraction platform situated in the freezing, treacherous environment of the North Sea, just off the jagged coast of Norway. The offshore energy corporation he worked for maintained a severely restricted external communications grid. They routed absolutely every single piece of data through a central, highly filtered corporate gateway to prevent industrial espionage and to conserve extremely limited satellite bandwidth. Standard international phone calls were nearly impossible to connect without prior administrative authorization from the mainland office. But I did not need their permission. I booted up a highly specialized satellite frequency scanning program, a sophisticated tool usually strictly reserved for penetrating highly restricted maritime communication channels during corporate security audits. I successfully hijacked a low-orbit commercial satellite relay, bouncing a customized, heavily encrypted signal directly past the corporate firewall and into the rig's localized internal network. It took over 3 grueling hours of relentless, aggressive brute forcing to bypass the maritime security protocols. Finally, at exactly 4:45 in the morning, my terminal successfully established a direct, two-way visual and audio uplink directly to his specific crew quarters. The monitor on my desk crackled violently to life, initially filled with thick digital snow and heavy static interference. Then, the visual feed stabilized. Marcus appeared on the screen. He looked profoundly exhausted, his face smeared with dark engine grease, wearing heavy orange industrial coveralls. When his bloodshot eyes recognized my face on his terminal, his entire body immediately tensed, instinctively bracing for catastrophic news from home. I did not waste a single second on polite pleasantries. I looked right into the camera lens and coldly asked him why he never bothered to call his own grieving daughter. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. He practically screamed at the monitor, his deep voice distorting violently through the heavy audio interference. He swore profusely, telling me he recorded personalized video messages for her every single week without fail. He desperately explained how he ordered massive boxes of birthday presents, customized telescopes, and rare books, having them shipped directly to the house. He sent letters detailing his life at sea. "She never replies to a single thing, Zoe," he yelled, his voice cracking with a decade of accumulated heartbreak. "Mom and Dad told me she wants absolutely nothing to do with me. They said hearing my voice just upsets her and causes her psychological distress. They told me to just keep sending the money and stay away so she can heal." That is exactly when the final, most sickening puzzle piece locked perfectly into place. I quickly ran a diagnostic on the network traffic logs I had previously pulled from my parents' router. It was an absolute masterpiece of malicious, targeted digital engineering. Arthur and Beatrice had not just intercepted the physical mail at the front door. They had actively logged into their network administrator panel, established custom firewall rules, blacklisted Marcus's specific international routing numbers, and completely rerouted all of his incoming emails straight to a hidden, permanently deleted folder. They had systematically and intentionally isolated a father and his young daughter, starving them both of each other's love, simply to maintain absolute, unquestioned control over the massive financial pipeline he faithfully provided. I shared my screen directly to his feed. I dumped the raw, unedited data right in front of his eyes. I showed him the luxury recreational vehicle purchase order. I showed him the forged school withdrawal forms bearing his stolen digital signature. And finally, I showed him the digital receipt from the underground auction house detailing the sale of his deceased wife's cello. I sat in total silence and watched a hardened, rugged man of steel completely break down. This was a man who routinely worked 90-hour weeks on a freezing, volatile ocean platform. A man who faced massive ocean swells without blinking. He covered his face with his massive, calloused hands, and through the lagging audio feed, I heard the agonizing, guttural sobs of a desperate father realizing his precious daughter had been treated like a disposable financial asset by his own parents. The crushing grief lasted for exactly 60 seconds. Then, the tears abruptly stopped. When he looked back up at the camera, the overwhelming sadness had been entirely replaced by a cold, terrifying, and calculating fury that perfectly mirrored my own. We moved together with synchronized, lethal precision. Operating rapidly through the secure, encrypted legal portal of the United States Embassy located in Oslo, Marcus immediately executed an emergency, digitally notarized power of attorney. He granted me absolute, sweeping legal authority over his financial affairs and temporary emergency custody of his daughter. Before our connection even fully terminated, I watched him aggressively throw his gear into a canvas duffel bag, screaming at his shift foreman to immediately book the very next transport helicopter off the rig. He did not care about the corporate penalties or his contract. He was coming home. While he was flying over the ocean, I made my next move. I contacted the most aggressive, ruthless, and high-profile family law attorney operating in the city of Seattle. By 9 in the morning, we had completely bypassed standard waiting procedures and filed an emergency ex parte petition directly with the civil court judge. The formal charges we leveled against Arthur and Beatrice were utterly devastating and backed by impenetrable digital evidence, massive financial fraud, aggravated identity theft, and severe prolonged abuse of legal guardianship. The quiet, hidden war had officially moved from the digital shadows straight into the glaring lights of the courtroom. The moment the uniformed court process server handed Arthur and Beatrice the heavily sealed manila envelope containing the emergency civil court subpoena, their carefully constructed world of leisurely golf games and vintage wine tasting shattered. But narcissists do not retreat when they are cornered. They attack. The initial panic of being legally exposed rapidly morphed into a vicious, highly coordinated counteroffensive. Operating from their sprawling, high-tech command center, also known as their pristine country club dining room, they immediately launched a ruthless smear campaign designed to completely obliterate my reputation before I ever set foot inside the courthouse. Within 48 hours, the toxic rumors had completely saturated our affluent hometown. They whispered to anyone who would listen that I had suffered a massive, debilitating psychological breakdown. They painted a horrifying, entirely fictional narrative portraying me as a jealous, deranged spinster actively plotting to illegally siphon off my brother's massive offshore fortune. The most sickening lie they circulated was that I had violently kidnapped their precious granddaughter in the dead of night, holding her hostage in a cheap motel while suffering from severe delusions of grandeur. To solidify their defensive wall, they hired the most notoriously aggressive, high-priced defense attorney in the entire state. He was a ruthless corporate bulldog, known for utterly destroying opposing witnesses through relentless character assassination. Together, they began assembling a terrifying arsenal of fabricated evidence. Through their extensive network of wealthy, highly unethical private physicians, they somehow managed to procure heavily doctored medical evaluations. These forged documents were specifically designed to legally classify me as mentally incompetent, thereby invalidating any testimony or digital evidence I might try to present to the judge. Furthermore, they repeatedly attempted to bypass the hotel security desk, desperately trying to route intimidating phone calls directly to Chloe's room to terrify the 8-year-old into absolute silence before she could ever take the stand. I had intercepted and blocked every single one of those incoming lines. But the sheer malice of their intent was suffocating. The psychological warfare reached its absolute peak on the very night before the emergency hearing. The heavy, stifling silence of my hotel room was broken by a single, sharp notification from my secure inbox. It was an email sent directly from my parents' high-powered defense attorney, marked with high priority. I opened the encrypted message and read through the legal jargon. It was an unofficial, last-minute settlement offer. Arthur and Beatrice were willing to generously offer me exactly 10% of Marcus's total accumulated trust fund capital, provided I immediately withdraw the civil lawsuit, hand Chloe back into their custody, and sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. Attached to the bottom of the formal offer was a highly arrogant, deeply contemptuous personal note from my mother. "Take the money and walk away, Zoe. You are completely out of your league. You have always been the weak, unstable link in this family. Do not force us to embarrass you in front of the entire city." It was a catastrophic, fatal miscalculation. By sending that settlement offer over an unsecured email server, accompanied by a brazen admission of financial leverage, they had just handed me the final bloody nail for their coffin. They fundamentally misunderstood the entire nature of this conflict. They thought this was a simple negotiation over money. They did not realize I was systematically dismantling their entire existence. I did not send a single word in response. I closed the email client and spent the entire night wide awake. I dragged the heavy hotel desk to the absolute center of the room and connected my laptop to a high-speed, wide-format industrial printer I had specifically rented for this exact occasion. Hour after hour, the machine whirred and clicked, spitting out hundreds of pages of raw, undeniable truth. I meticulously printed every single digital log, every intercepted Internet Protocol location, every forged electronic signature, and every damning bank statement. I used thick rolls of heavy-duty tape to physically stitch the individual pages together on the carpeted floor. By 5 in the morning, I had constructed a massive, highly visual data map spanning exactly 3 meters in length. It was a sprawling, undeniable timeline of their greed, connecting the dots from the Norwegian oil rig directly to their luxury vehicle purchases and the underground auction house. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting, beautiful in its absolute cold brutality. As the first rays of dawn began to creep through the hotel window, illuminating the massive paper weapon laid out on the floor, I picked up my phone. I navigated to the secure messaging application on the tablet I had given to my niece, who was sleeping peacefully in the next room. I typed out a single, simple promise and hit send. "Tomorrow, I will buy back the cello for you. Do not be afraid." The heavy oak doors of the King County Civil Court closed with a definitive, echoing thud, sealing us inside the imposing, wood-paneled room. The air was incredibly sterile, practically vibrating with tension. Sitting across the aisle at the respondents' table, Arthur and Beatrice looked like the absolute picture of persecuted innocence. My mother wore a conservative, impeccably tailored navy blue suit, clutching a lace handkerchief in her trembling hands. My father sat rigidly with his chin held high, projecting the quiet dignity of a patriarch under siege. Their high-priced defense attorney stood up to deliver his opening remarks, and it was a masterclass in disgusting, fictionalized theater. He paced slowly in front of the judge's bench, weaving a tragic, tear-jerking narrative. He painted my parents as selfless, heroic elders who had graciously sacrificed the golden years of their hard-earned retirement to step up and raise an incredibly troubled, unruly 8-year-old child. He boldly claimed they were stepping in for a deadbeat, absent son who had entirely abandoned his family for the open sea. He gestured dismissively toward me, attempting to frame my emergency petition as the manic, jealous delusion of an estranged sister desperate for attention and financial control. He spoke eloquently for 20 solid minutes, relying entirely on emotional manipulation and aggressive character assassination. When it was finally our turn, my attorney did not stand up to deliver a passionate, tearful counterspeech. He simply nodded at me. I stood up from my chair, my face completely blank, and walked directly over to the center evidence table. I reached into my leather portfolio, pulled out the massive 3-meter-long canvas map I had assembled the night before, and unrolled it across the polished mahogany wood. I then connected my encrypted tablet to the high-definition projector mounted on the ceiling. The massive white wall behind the witness stand instantly illuminated with a stark, undeniable web of forensic financial data. I did not raise my voice. I did not hurl insults. I let the absolute silence of the data speak for itself. "Your Honor," my attorney began, his voice dangerously calm, "we are not here to debate family dynamics or emotional grievances. We are here to present a documented, chronological timeline of severe financial fraud and child endangerment. Please direct your attention to the projected map." I tapped my screen, zooming in on the first cluster of data. I methodically walked the court through the irrefutable digital footprints. I showed the judge the exact internet protocol address pinging from my parents' living room router, mathematically proving that Arthur and Beatrice were the ones who forged the digital signature to forcibly withdraw their granddaughter from the private academy. I displayed the bank routing numbers, tracking the $15,000 deposited on the first day of every single month. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as I traced the immediate, subsequent diversions of those exact funds. The screen flashed with the certified receipts for the luxury recreational vehicle down payment, the massive credit card bills for their overseas vacations, and the custom titanium golf clubs, all perfectly date-stamped and aligning with the stolen tuition money. Arthur's face abruptly lost its healthy artificial tan, fading into a sickly, chalky white. Beatrice aggressively crumpled her lace handkerchief, her eyes darting desperately toward their highly paid lawyer, who was suddenly furiously shuffling through his own notes, realizing he had been completely blindsided by a mountain of raw, undeniable evidence. But we were not finished. My attorney stepped forward, holding a certified, digitally extracted log of their private communications. This was the final, lethal strike. "Your Honor," my lawyer stated sharply, cutting through the heavy silence of the room, "we respectfully request that you read aloud the internal text messages exchanged between the respondents, which were legally extracted from their shared household server, along with the extortionate email their counsel foolishly sent to my client late last night offering her 10% of the stolen funds to drop this case." The judge, a stern, deeply serious woman with decades of experience, adjusted her glasses and took the thick stack of papers handed to her by the bailiff. She scanned the highlighted lines. The temperature in the room plummeted as she cleared her throat and read the statements aloud for the official public court record. "Quote," the judge announced, her voice dripping with sheer, unadulterated disgust. "Marcus makes far too much money out on that ocean. He owes us for giving him life. His offshore salary is essentially our delayed retirement fund. As for little Chloe, a basic roof over her head and the local free public school is more than enough for a child like her." End quote. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the small gallery of court staff. The carefully constructed, flawless facade of the noble, self-sacrificing grandparents instantly shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The judge slammed the papers down onto her heavy wooden desk, her eyes blazing with absolute fury as she glared down at my parents. Before the defense attorney could even open his mouth to formulate a desperate, pathetic objection, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom forcefully swung open. Every head in the room snapped around. Marcus stood in the doorway. He was still wearing his heavy, salt-stained industrial boots and a thick maritime jacket. He looked profoundly exhausted, his eyes dark and sunken from the grueling emergency transatlantic flight from Northern Europe, but his jaw was set like solid granite. He marched straight down the center aisle, bypassing the completely paralyzed defense table, and handed a sealed, heavily stamped manila envelope directly to my attorney. My attorney immediately passed it to the bench. "Your Honor, I present newly arrived, notarized documentation directly from the United States Embassy, along with certified telecommunication logs from the Offshore Drilling Corporation. These documents conclusively prove that the respondents actively configured their home network to aggressively block every single phone call, video message, and email sent from the child's father for the past year." Marcus turned slowly to face Arthur and Beatrice. He did not scream. He did not lunge at them. The look of absolute, chilling disgust in his eyes was infinitely more devastating than any physical blow. They shrank back into their expensive leather chairs, utterly destroyed by the monumental weight of their own exposed sins. The judge did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. The gavel came down with a deafening final crack. She immediately and permanently stripped Arthur and Beatrice of all guardianship rights, transferring full and unquestioned legal custody back to Marcus, with myself listed as the emergency secondary guardian. But she did not stop there. The judge officially referred the entire comprehensive data packet to the federal prosecutor's office for immediate criminal indictment regarding the wire fraud and identity theft. Her final order was to completely and indefinitely freeze every single bank account, property deed, and retirement asset under my parents' names to ensure full, absolute financial restitution for Chloe's heavily drained trust fund. The war was over. We had annihilated them without ever raising our voices. 2 hours later, the afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the pristine driveway of my parents' sprawling estate. Marcus and I were quietly loading Chloe's packed suitcases into the trunk of my car. Gently resting across the entire back seat, securely strapped in, was the beautiful antique cello. I had used my own personal savings to aggressively buy it back from the underground auction house the moment I left the courtroom. Arthur and Beatrice stood silently on the marble steps of their grand front porch. The house behind them was completely dark. Within a few short weeks, the federal banks would foreclose on the property to settle the massive restitution debts. Their wealthy country club friends had already universally blocked their phone numbers the moment the verdict became public knowledge. They were completely ruined, entirely isolated, and about to face massive criminal charges. Marcus closed the trunk. He walked over to the passenger door where his daughter was sitting, safely reunited with her father at last. We both got into the car. We did not wave. We did not offer any parting words of comfort or anger. We did not even give them the satisfaction of a final, fleeting glance in the rearview mirror. We simply drove away, leaving them entirely alone to drown in the deafening, suffocating silence of their own making. The data had spoken, and it had ultimately conquered every single one of their beautiful, expensive lies. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Haley Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.